Donnelly.
Question 1, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Executive Office is committed to ensuring that the information and services it provides are fully accessible to all parts of the community, and this includes its communication on social media. The Executive Information Service has provided accessibility training for communication staff to enable them to understand the specific challenges of some users, as well as the communication formats that are best suited to their needs. In addition, EIS has established a social media working group with one of its key objectives being to share expertise, best practice and learning on accessibility. Some of the practical steps taken to support the accessibility of social media content across all platforms, including alt text and descriptive captions used in all images. Subtitles are added to every video published on the Department's social media platforms, ensuring that low contrast images are not used, using clear language on posts and only including links that make clear where the user is being directed to.
Mr. Donnelly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Deputy First Minister for that. Would the Deputy First Minister agree with me that it is important to make social media content accessible to people with visual impairments, and that functions such as alt text image description help to aid understanding and make social media more inclusive for all?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Indeed, that's why the Department has led the way in doing so, and we have done so for some considerable time. We do try to focus on that accessibility aspect in terms of all of our posts, and that includes, as indicated, that where we use videos, for example, we try to subtitle those, but also to make things as clear as possible and use the plainest language possible.
Orlea Flynn.
Thank the Deputy First Minister for her answers. Could the Deputy First Minister also detail a bit further how the Executive Office ensures equality of opportunity for all, please?
Minister.
Thank the member for her question. The member will be aware that the Department is under that equality duty as set out in Section 75, as are all departments and public bodies. That is a duty that we take seriously. It is important to us that we are able to communicate our strategies, our information, including things that we are doing day in and day out to the maximum number of people in the clearest possible way. So that's why, as indicated, the training has taken place in terms of our comms people to ensure that they are fully aware of the range of tools that they have to make that communication clear and to fulfil our equality obligations.
Dan Forsyth.
And I thank the Deputy First Minister for her answers so far. I asked the Deputy First Minister how important she thinks the role of social media was in recent communications in the response to Storm Éowyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank the member for her question. I think we're all very aware that the way we communicate now has changed. It's not just through radio, the TV programmes and news channels. A huge number of people now do get their information from social media. They are choosing more and more to get their news and their information from those sources. So I think it's incredibly important that we do maximise all of those. That's certainly what I endeavoured to do during the storm. And even though, and I know that everyone around the room will be very conscious of this, as MLAs in a personal capacity, we don't have social media managers, and we do an awful lot of that ourselves, just on top of all of the other activities that we participate in. And I have no doubt that all of us individually could get better at that, and I think we do try to improve upon that. But I do think it is an important part of our job to communicate that on a very regular basis, and that's exactly what I endeavoured to do during the storm, to get that communication out.
Declan Kearney. Deputy First Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The appointment of the Language Commissioners and the Director and members of the Office of Identity and Cultural Expression is essential to implement the provisions of the Identity and Language Act, for which TEO is responsible. We are committed to establishing the three bodies, and preparations are now at an advanced stage. We hope to be in a position to formally launch the competition shortly.
Mr. Kearney.
Minister, can you specifically outline what has the Executive Office been doing to progress establishment of the bodies and the appointment of the Commissioners, and within what specific time frame?
Deputy First Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for his question. He will be aware that these are new appointments processes, and there's a number of them. There's not just the two Commissioners, but of course the Office of Identity as well, which will go out to public appointments. So there's been a significant amount of work carried out by the officials within the Department. That has included the business case process for all three offices, the paper that went up to the First Minister and myself in terms of the establishment and the broad direction of that, in line with the statutory responsibilities and are set out in the legislation. But in addition to that then is the whole process around public appointments. These appointments will be in line with the public appointments guidance. That means that there is a process to be followed. There has been a number of preparatory works that have taken place, and that has included looking at the criteria, the spec, the advertisements, and etc. So we are currently considering that very, very detailed submission, and we hope to go out very shortly.
Sir Dixon.
The Deputy First Minister for answers so far. Deputy First Minister, can you tell the House when you would expect all of those processes to be completed and that there will be an opportunity for your department to bring that information to your Executive Office Committee?
Deputy First Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank the member for his question. I understand that, of course, these appointments are based in the legislation that has already been consulted on by the committee, and indeed that legislation is in place. So these appointments will be fully in line with the statutory responsibilities as set out in that legislation and would not require consultation again with the committee or others. These would be public appointments that would go out to public advertisement for people to come forward and to show an interest in those. There will then be a public appointments process carried out in line with the public appointments guidance in relation to that. So yes, we're satisfied that a lot of that work has already been completed. It was a significant amount of work, and that the First Minister and myself are currently looking at sort of the final steps in that and hope to go out very shortly.
Cara Hunter.
Thank the Deputy First Minister for her answers so far. Deputy First Minister, do you agree that there has been a total failure from this executive regarding funding for Fórnas Gaeilge? And can you please update the House the last time that you and the First Minister spoke about the Language Commissioner?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the member for a question. I don't agree at all that there's been a total failure. In fact, there's been a significant investment in Irish language and indeed Ulster Scots over the course of not just the last number of years, but the last 17 years from restoration back in 2007. That has led to a significant growth in the number of funded groups, of funded schools and different mechanisms, and indeed to this legislation that was passed at Westminster. I speak to the First Minister on a regular basis about all of these issues and trying to ensure the member will be aware that it is a very difficult fiscal environment right across government. People are sitting on waiting lists crying out for that additional investment which we are striving to try to find. Our core public services need that investment and transformation. But of course we want to ensure that we can invest in the maximum number of things possible while moving forward to improve our public services as well. So I don't agree with the premise of the member's questions, but of course we will continue to discuss these important issues.
Carl.
So you'll be aware of Irish language groups' concern about losing funding over the last week or so, or news breaking about that. My understanding is that a new framework was discussed at the NSMC last year to discuss a new framework for funding bodies like Fórnas Gaeilge and others. Would the Deputy First Minister commit to publishing that new framework?
I thank the member for his question. I'm not aware that it was discussed. If I am incorrect about that, I certainly will write to the member. I understand that the financial issues pertaining to this body is to do with some pension contributions or other aspects that are separate entirely from what our fund. We have not reduced our funding contribution, as far as I'm aware, from a Northern Ireland 25% contribution that we have given to this. So I do understand that there are some issues, but those issues, as I understand it, pertain to the Irish government and not to the Northern Ireland executive. The funding model put forward, as referenced in this House previously, was much broader indeed, and I want to put this on record that the paper that came up from the Finance Minister did not reference that body whatsoever, or the issue of Irish language, or any funding streams within the Irish language body. It was about changing the way North-South bodies are funded, away from what had been previously agreed and has been in place since the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, and that is in the context in which that paper and that proposal had been looked at.
Brooks.
Question 3, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The St Patrick's Day period offers an opportunity to deepen our connections with the US. This year there are around a dozen events being organised. However, currently no invitations have been issued to ministers from the White House. Once we have confirmation of the full range of events in DC, the First Minister and I will consider our engagement. It is important Northern Ireland is represented, but we need to balance this with the value for money and commitment to leadership, of course, here at home.
Mr. Brooks.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I know the Deputy First Minister has been involved for many years in engagement on Northern Ireland's behalf in the US. Just at this time where we have a changed administration, would you agree that that engagement in DC in particular is crucial to building those relations? The Finance Minister outlined just last week £1 billion worth of exports and lobbying even for the Special Economic Envoy. Is she hoping to undertake that engagement?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for a supplementary question. Of course, we should always endeavour to build those positive relationships, and I think that there is indeed an opportunity because, as outlined, there's those links both to the Scots-Irish connection, the Ulster-Scots connection, particularly with the Vice President. He's spoken about that before. So there is that opportunity to have those soft diplomatic links, not just in terms of investment and trade, and those have always been a key focus, but also in terms of that culture, identity and shared history. Of course, it is important to remember that the opportunities that we get to engage with the US President and the administration is something that we should cherish. It is something that many other places do not get, that either the access or indeed the level of access that we get. And when we engage with the President of the United States administration, we are engaging with the Office of President. Indeed, I went to the US last year and there were many things that I would not agree with President Biden on. I went because I was engaging with the Office of President. And likewise, this is not about engaging with the person but the office to the benefit of the people of Northern Ireland. We have had a significant amount of success with foreign direct investment and in growing those links with the US, and we must continue to do that.
Thank the Deputy First Minister for her answers thus far. Does the Minister share my concern about the potential loss of funding to the International Fund for Ireland, which is in doubt as part of a review of overseas funding directed by the new US administration?
Thank you. I think with every administration there is a change of tone, of direction, of particular views, and I think there's no doubt we're going to see that with this new presidential term. But of course we will always do everything that we can to fight and push for the best deal for Northern Ireland. We have had many contributions to Northern Ireland, including by way of these types of funds over many decades, and that has always been appreciated. So certainly it is an issue that we have been raising. We want to see that continue, and we will be doing everything that we can to continue that engagement to ensure that it does.
Paula Bradshaw.
First Minister, for your answer so far. Could you please outline when the international relations strategy will be updated to take account, as you say, of the change of administration in the US, who have been quite aggressive in recent weeks towards their neighbours and others? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In terms of the international relations strategy, many of the key areas, of course, are non-devolved, but there are engagements that we have, both in terms of trying to attract inward investment to some success, and indeed in terms of building those relationships and networks in the US and beyond. And as indicated, that is something that we should continue to endeavour to do. I think it was right and proper that the revised international relations strategy waited to see the outcome of the presidential election. And of course we're working through what some of the implications of that will be. It is very clear that President Trump will take a strong America First policy. That may well have some impacts in terms of, for example, the levels of foreign direct investment from the US, in terms of the tariff regimes that may be entered into. But we will be considering all of these things in due course and making sure that our international relations strategy is fit for purpose to make sure that we are influenced as much as possible where it is practical to do so.
Deputy First Minister, on the 12th of September last year, I tabled a priority written question asking how much your department spent on your last trip to Washington. You still haven't answered. When were you provided with a draft answer by your officials to that question? And more importantly, why does your department so often flout its obligations under the standing orders of this House to answer straightforward questions?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for his question. Of course, the Office of First and Deputy First Minister, the Executive Office, is a different type of office than other offices in that we do have to agree an answer to go out, and sometimes that is easier than at other times, but we do endeavour to try to turn that around as quickly as possible. It's not simply as simple as a minister taking a look at a question, signing that off and out it goes. We do have a process where we try to get both sides of the office to agree what that response may be. There's also some issues in terms of course, the detail of questions and making sure that those are accurate. So in terms of the specific question he is asking, I will certainly write to the member with the details of that.
Colin Crawford.
Please, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As an executive, we are making progress in relation to climate change adaptation measures. The Department for Agriculture, the Environment and Rural Affairs recently published a report on our most recent adaptation programme, which showed that over 130 individual actions contained within the programme, significant progress had been made in around 120 of them. Furthermore, the Climate Change Committee has highlighted that while adaptation planning here is at a relatively early stage, our programmes to date have been focused on the key elements needed for positive adaptation. So while positive progress has been made, we know that we can and will do more. Indeed, our draft programme for government has also recognised this by including the need to undertake a series of further adaptation measures, such as improved flood protection schemes in certain areas. Work on the next climate change adaptation programme is ongoing and is due to be brought before the Assembly in the coming months.
Mr. Crawford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Deputy First Minister for her answers thus far. Deputy First Minister, do you believe that currently there is adequate collaboration amongst departments to tackle climate change effectively? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank the member for his question. I think collaboration is always to the benefit of anything that we are trying to do. It's not just, I think, that collaboration across departments and agencies here, but indeed that collaboration right across the UK and indeed these Isles. I'm pleased to say that these issues have been discussed at a number of those bodies, including the British Irish Council and others, that are designed to help that collaboration and cooperation. The challenges that we face are the same right throughout, and therefore the solutions that we find and the interventions that we want to carry out, we can certainly learn from our neighbours on, and if that accelerates and supports better policy making and better interventions, I think that is certainly to the good of Northern Ireland.
Hi, Harvey.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sure the Deputy First Minister will agree with me that the measures to address climate change must be balanced and affordable, particularly in regards to our agri sector. How is this balance and affordability being ensured?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank the member for his question. Of course, as outlined before in this place, our farmers do an incredible job. They are such an essential part of our economy here in Northern Ireland. They are essential in terms of the supply of nutritious, good quality, locally produced food. They need our support. They do not need additional burdens to be placed on them that is not proportionate. And I think that is key. At the last British Irish Council meeting, the theme of that was a just transition, and very often we bandy about these words, but it is important that actually that's what it is in reality, that any transition from one type of economy towards a greener economy is done in a just and fair way, and that must mean that it is not disproportionate and unfair on our farmers or on our businesses. We must move forward with the maximum of consensus in a just way.
Patsy Midlone.
If I can call you, and thank the Minister as well. Minister, in regard to the climate change, and we just had a sample of it recently with Storm Owen, could you give us some indication as to how or in what way the Executive Office, or indeed the Executive, is collaborating with utilities such as NIE, NI Water and indeed others out there, especially the likes of Fibre Network, because we saw just at one fell swoop how virtually the entire region was just left, especially in those rural areas, without any means of communication, any means of heating, any means of power.
Okay, I think we'll get to
so that'll be, if you could give an indication, please, as to what has been done at executive level.
Deputy First Minister.
Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for his very important question. I spoke to many families that were very much in that situation. It wasn't just a single issue of having no electricity, it was a double, a triple or more in terms of multiple key aspects being down, should that be from a mobile phone signal to their internet and broadband to water. And that is simply something that we must take into account in terms of our civil contingencies planning. I've already spoken to our civil contingencies team and indeed to the First Minister a number of times about these issues. I think that there are mitigations that we can put in, there are contingencies that we need to put in. That is the whole purpose of civil contingencies planning. So very simple things like, for example, the access to generators to get down to support NI Water to make sure that the water is not off for the length of time it was off this time. In terms of looking at battery pack or backup for those phone masts, it's just simply unacceptable that there could be people, if this were to occur again, in homes without electricity, without water, but not being able to phone emergency services or others for that help and support that is needed. So yes, absolutely, we've asked civil contingencies to take into account those very specific points and to make sure that the contingencies arrangements, the emergency arrangements are such that we can move quickly to stop that from happening again.
Matthew O'Toole.
Thank you, Speaker. Question 5.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Since our statement last May on the initial legislative programme of the Assembly Session 24-25, 7 bills have been introduced, with the introduction of a schools uniform bill expected shortly. We recognise there has been some slippage, however this reflects the complexities involved in turning policy into legislation rather than any lack of effort or ambition by the Executive. We have recently consulted Executive Ministers on the progress of their bills and on their legislative intentions for the remainder of the session, and intend to make a statement to the Assembly on the full 2024-25 legislative programme in the near future. Without preempting that statement, we expect that the majority of those bills will have been introduced by the summer recess. Information is also being gathered in preparation for the 25-26 Assembly.
Mr O'Toole.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Deputy First Minister, I think an ordinary reasonable person out there looking at a target which is just about half met in 2025 for 2024 would think that that is pathetic. The Executive promised a modest list of bills which are not even halfway through. When will the 2024 legislative programme be complete? And furthermore, when will we have a final programme for government?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm not sure if I can choose which question there I want to answer, but I thank him for his supplementary questions. First of all, I would outline the legislative programme from a standing start position. We were keen that it had ambition. We came in just a year ago. That required ministers coming into their departments and assessing what is likely to go forward, but also it is important that those pieces of legislation reflect the ministers and reflect the views of committees, etc. as well. Some of those have come forward. I would say to the member, when you look at, for example, Wales brought forward 6 pieces of legislation in 2024. We have brought forward 7 pieces of legislation in 2024. So there is, in terms of comparable statistics out there. But I would also say to the member that we should not always look to legislation first. There are many, many different ways to bring about change. That includes reform. It includes transformation of the way we are doing things. It is about bringing forward policy and policy statements. It's about tackling the big issues within departments at the moment. It's not always about new legislation. That said, we are taking measures to work with departments to ensure that the ambition set out by members to bring forward legislation can be realised, and that legislation can hit this House for proper scrutiny in a timely way.
Alongside progress on the legislative programme, can the Deputy First Minister outline the top-line achievements by the Executive over the last year?
Deputy First Minister.
I thank the member for his question. Yes, it has been a busy first 12 months, and of course we would make clear that this is not the totality of our ambition. We are finalising the programme for government. We hope to come forward with that very, very shortly. That will set the high-level prioritisation. Of course, the challenge for any new administration is not how many priorities and trying to get everything in, but actually cutting those back to a small number to focus on to make a real difference about. But I am pleased that right throughout all of the departments we have made significant progress. Should that be from bringing forward initial actions on affordable childcare, the work ongoing for an affordable childcare strategy, tackling infrastructure issues such as the announcements around the A5 and the Enniskillen bypass. In terms of our Communities Minister bringing forward the football funding scheme and getting that open, but indeed important issues like the housing supply strategy. And that is in the context where we have discussed all of the issues around our budgets, draft programme for government going out to consultation and other key moves forward. We are in the process of an ambitious drive within departments towards transformation and delivery, and we hope to be able to, within the next 12 months, be standing in this chamber demonstrating demonstrating that actual delivery in a meaningful way.
Brian Kingston.
Mr. Speaker, and would the Deputy First Minister agree with me that, in fairness, ministers across departments, all departments have been getting on with making decisions and have made several significant key decisions during the course of her last year in office?
I thank the member for his question, and indeed, look, it's important that we're in a four-party coalition. There will be many different aspirations within all four of those parties, but we are determined to make a real and tangible difference to people's lives on the issues that matter to them. We listened, and we have listened to people in the draft programme for government process. We have heard people need to see those reductions in health waiting lists. People need to see an affordable childcare strategy that is being rolled out and really making that positive impact in terms of families' lives. We need to see that ambitious infrastructure investment, investment in our water, in our schools, on our roads, and we're determined to drive forward, working with colleagues across that executive, so that we can prove and demonstrate the tangible difference and value that the executive is making by the end of this term.
Michelle Guy.
Can I ask the Deputy First Minister what role she will play along with the First Minister to ensure prompt scrutiny of legislation through committees to enable the programme to be completed within this mandate?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the member for her question. It's important to remember that when we ask ministers for the bills to be included in the legislative programme, we don't see the substance of that legislation, and of course, as that comes up for consideration to the executive, there may well be parts of that, if not large parts of that, that everyone is not in agreement with. We're always very conscious of that as a risk, but I think it's also important that that legislation does get to the committee, because the committees play such an important role on the scrutiny of that legislation, the ability to call witnesses, stakeholders to examine those provisions, and of course that important role of committees to bring forward potentially further amendments to that legislation as well. Of course, ministers can do that by supporting that process where the legislation gets to the committee, but the committees of course have those statutory powers in relation to that. I think importantly to take the time that is needed by committees to do their job of scrutiny in the way that it needs to be done.
Mark Durgan.
Question 6.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Interdepartmental Working Group was established in 2021 to bring forward advice on the options for an infrastructure commission. A draft paper was produced in early 2022, which set out an initial assessment of options for consideration and as a precursor to a more detailed analysis and development of a business case. Officials are reviewing the draft paper to take into account the developments, including the NIAO follow-up report on major capital programmes and subsequently PAC hearing the SIB report on root causes of delay in progress with the investment strategy. So we are currently considering the report from the recent SIB review. The recommendations from the SIB review will also inform the revision of the draft paper. Decisions on the way forward will be a matter for the executive in due course.
Mr. Durkan.
Mr. Speaker, thank the Deputy First Minister for her answer. Given the lamentable track record of the executive in the delivery of major projects that are taking far too much time and costing far too much money, and this isn't just a recent phenomenon, does the Deputy First Minister agree that doing nothing is not an option, and if we don't change how we do things, we won't change how things are done?
Deputy First Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the member for his question. Absolutely. Doing nothing is not an option. We want to improve the processes that we have to make sure that more and more of our capital projects are coming in on time and on budget. Unfortunately, public sector do not do large-scale infrastructure projects well. There's all kinds of reasons for that, not least at the business case stage. It is very much about the projection of costs. You don't actually know those costs until you go out to the private sector and you get the bids in on that. So, of course, there's always a lot of movement around this. But we have tasked SIB, and particularly in the context of the development of the investment strategy for Northern Ireland, ISNI, we have tasked them to take a look at those issues that are causing that delay. Everything from the length of time in a business case process, the length of time to go out to procurement, what goes wrong in terms of the rollout of capital projects. I think that the concept of an infrastructure commission is an interesting one, but importantly in all of this, no matter what we decide to do as the way forward, it must improve the way we do capital infrastructure rollout. And that's the absolute test that we'll be applying to any steps forward.
Well.
Collier, I could ask the Deputy First Minister whether she agrees with me that investing in infrastructure is key to growing a thriving and prosperous economy, and that any investment must be fair and balanced.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank the member for his question. Absolutely. I want all parts of Northern Ireland to be able to thrive and to succeed. And indeed, I've always said it's very simple. If we can bring those infrastructure projects in on time and on budget, that means we can do more with the capital allocation that we have. If those projects are taking longer and costing more, we can do less with the capital allocation that we have. It's that simple, and that is why there is that huge incentive right across government for us to do better when it comes to big infrastructure rollout and to actually deliver for the people of Northern Ireland on those important projects.
Clark.
Didn't indulge us on the lack of progress that the former minister made when he was in office. However, that said, Minister, could you give us an indication of when the investment strategy will be published?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the member for his question. The draft is under active consideration. Part of the challenge around the investment strategy will be the capital budget that we have available. We are currently in a one-year budget. That is frustrating. However, that should not hold back progress on that. But I think it's important to say that that document will be scalable. We will be endeavouring to do everything that we can to maximise the amount of capital funding going into our budget to enable us to do more and to do so strategically.
Moving to topicals, Matthew O'Toole.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Deputy First Minister, you said earlier that you and the First Minister are driving delivery. I'd hate to see the instructor who passed you both in the test. I'd suggest that you need to revisit some of that. But in relation to St Patrick's Day, we're now 1 month from St Patrick's Day. Have you and the First Minister had any conversation, and please be specific, about whether you will attend Washington, specifically the White House, that week?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the member for his question. Unfortunately, unlike the SDLP, we are not in the spirit of turning down invitations we have not yet received and may never receive, but we will wait to see what comes through in terms of that week. We are planning around, I notice that the Irish Government have just released their information about their attendance around DC on St Patrick's Week and their activities to promote their issues. I am strongly of the view that we should take every opportunity to stand up for this place and to promote this place, and that includes, if the opportunity is given to us, to engage at the highest possible levels in the US to make our case and to promote Northern Ireland.
Thank you, Deputy First Minister. My party has always believed in engaging in the US. That doesn't just mean the administration. She and I were both interns many years ago in Washington. I believe in engaging there. But can I say, people in Northern Ireland and elsewhere who have seen in recent weeks the new president suggest ethnic cleansing in Gaza, suspend aid to the world's poorest, and now appear to sacrifice the Ukrainian people to the depredations of Vladimir Putin, is there nothing that the Trump administration could do that would make you think twice about a photo op in the Oval Office?
Deputy First Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will be absolutely clear. We will engage with the US administration and with the President of the United States of America for the benefit of the people of Northern Ireland. That includes in relation to trade, that trading relationship which is hugely important. I would gently remind the member that there are many political leaders that one has to engage with that you do not agree with. Last year when I went to DC, I engaged with President Biden, even though on a wide range of issues I fundamentally disagreed with him politically. That is the case in many other areas as well. But what I am not prepared to do is to step away from my own small politics, but rather to step up for the people of Northern Ireland and to engage for the benefit of the people of Northern Ireland with the office of President of the United States and with the administration in the United States.
Philip Brett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Deputy First Minister, do you agree with me that the outworkings of the current recruitment exercise by the Police Service of Northern Ireland should result in appointments being made on the basis of merit, and that as you continue to lead this executive, you will not endorse the return to discriminatory practices when it comes to employment in the PSNI?
Deputy First Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the member for his important question. It is absolutely key that we move forward in this place with that sense of fairness and of equity, and that must be based on the best person for the job and not on discriminatory practices. That is fundamental if this place is going to move forward. I want to encourage as many people as possible from across all backgrounds here in Northern Ireland to step up and to join the PSNI and to play a role in the PSNI. I think it is a very positive thing for people to come forward from all sides of the community. We want to see that, but discrimination is always wrong. These appointments should always be on the basis of merit and merit alone.
Mr. Brett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Deputy First Minister further agree with me that rather than the nonsense written in the pages of the Belfast Telegraph, that one of the greatest barriers to some people applying to join the police is when they see their political leaders continue to celebrate terrorists who murdered police officers, and that there should be leadership and stop celebrating terrorism? Perhaps then we would see more people apply to join the PSNI.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I absolutely agree with the member. The people within the PSNI do an incredible job, at times a very difficult job, and I think that we should take the opportunity to say thank you and to pay tribute to all that they do. But likewise, we should pay tribute to the legacy of those who served also in the RUC and did so in defence of so many across this place in the most difficult and darkest of days. We've always said clearly that we will never allow the memory of what they did and the service that they give for the people of Northern Ireland to be besmirched and to be twisted into something that it was not. And indeed, I think the best thing that we can do as political leaders is to stand shoulder to shoulder to encourage all from across all communities to apply and to make it clear to all from across all communities that if you do so, you will not be discriminated against, you will be considered in a fair and open way, and that you will be appointed on merit.
Aoife Finnegan.
Mr. Speaker. And thank you for your answers so far. Does the Deputy First Minister agree with me that the British Government's farmers' inheritance tax will be detrimental to family farms in the north?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to welcome the member to her place as well, and thank you for the supplementary topical question. Indeed, absolutely, there's serious concerns out there within the farming community. I think all of us around this place have listened to the concerns articulated by our hard-working farmers and farming families. We have a strong and honourable tradition in this place of family farming right throughout and right across. We want to protect that. We want to recognise the hard work that they do. You cannot farm if you do not have a farm, and that farm is part and parcel of what you need in order to produce the agri-food, the goods, the necessary products that we so want our farmers to continue to be able to do. Having a farm is not a luxury to be taxed to such an extent that unfortunately those farms could leave families. So this is a key issue. We've raised this with the Chancellor, we've raised this directly with the Prime Minister. This UK Government needs to change tack on this issue and stand up for and protect our farmers, and we will not be silent in continuing to stand up for them.
Ms Finnegan.
Thank you. Will the Deputy First Minister commit again today to working alongside the First Minister and the entire Executive to press for these proposals to be scrapped?
Look, absolutely. As indicated, the UK Government needs to scrap this tax. It is a farm tax on farming families. Instead of taxing our farmers even further, this Government needs to stand up for our farmers and make sure that our farmers can continue doing the hard and great job that they do to support every one of us across Northern Ireland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Deputy First Minister. I'm just wondering if you can give us an update on the timeline for the appointment of Commissioner of Public Appointments.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the member for her question. Indeed, we are considering the proposals at the moment, and we hope to go out for advertisement for that role very, very shortly.
Ms Mahold.
Thank you. Would you be able to give us an assessment of how you think the extended vacancy in that position has impacted public opinion of politics and of public appointments?
Deputy First Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think it's incredibly important that our public appointments are not only independent and based on merit, but of course that there is that strong perception that they are as well. And indeed, in terms of the public appointments process, I do think that we have to have those discussions around whether or not the process around some of these things is fit for purpose, because it takes a hugely long time for these public appointments to be put in place to the point of readiness to go out for advertisement, and sometimes I think that doesn't match up with what the expectations or the desire of ministers or others may be. It's fine perhaps if you have that lead-in time and that goes out maybe 18 months to 12 months before the end of a particular term, but if that doesn't happen, then you can end up in the situation that we're in at the moment where there isn't a commissioner in place. So I do think that indeed I would endeavour to promise this House that we will take a look at all of those processes to make sure that any prospect of no minister being or no appointment being in place for a period of time is eliminated or reduced significantly.
Can
the Minister provide an update on the work of the Truth Recovery Independent Panel?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank the member for his important question. He will be aware that work is ongoing in terms of this area. A huge tribute to all of those who have worked so hard to get it to this point. I know for some that it is a point of frustration, but of course there are many different elements of this that have been recommended by the original proposals and that we're going forward with. We are very shortly to go out, hopefully, with the legislation. We are currently considering some of those policy issues. It just finished the consultation, so there's some big policy areas to be agreed with that as well, but I think that will be a positive move forward as well in terms of this particular area.
Mr. De Large.
Thank the Deputy First Minister for her answer. Does she agree that it's an important step to ensure that experiences are heard and for lessons to be learned?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Look, absolutely, you will be aware that we have gone out with that call, supporting that call of evidence for people to come forward to tell their personal stories. It is an opportunity for people to tell of their lived experience. And while it may be, I have no doubt, very, very difficult for those people to come forward and to go through that process, it is such an important part of what we're trying to do to get to the truth of what happened. So I do want to take the opportunity to encourage as many people as possible to come forward to this part of the work, to share their experiences and to tell their stories and their lived experience to contribute to this.
Call Ciara Ferguson.
Mr. Speaker, my constituency of Foyle has concerningly witnessed an increase in attacks on violence against women and girls, and it's important that we are doing everything we can to stop this stain on society. Can the Deputy First Minister update me on the rollout of the strategic framework to end violence against women and girls? Thank you.
Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the member for her question, and indeed, as indicated previously, the First Minister and I, when we came into these posts just over a year ago, this was a key area of importance for us. We wanted to push forward with this, and not just to deliver the strategy, but of course to deliver the framework as well, because that is where the action is in all of this. And I'm really pleased that the change funds have come out, not just in terms of region-wide, but of course through local councils as well. So those are now, I think, open in most councils, a call for applications from local groups that will be working in these areas, particularly around the area of prevention. This work is incredibly important, but we also know that the groups on the ground do such valuable work. They see the challenges, they know the issues, and they're able best, I think, they are in the best position to be able to step forward with these projects and initiatives as well. So we expect that the first of those will be able to roll out from about the 1st of April.
Ms Ferguson.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker, for your answer thus far. Does the Deputy First Minister agree with me that although this strategy is most definitely a first positive step, we must continue making ending violence against women and girls a top priority?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the member for her questions. I am pleased that this has been prioritised within the programme for government. We want to make clear that this is a priority for us. Every single act of violence towards a woman or girl, every death of a woman or girl through that violence is wrong. It needs to stop. We want to do everything that we can, not just to reduce but to eliminate that. I think that will be a combination of factors, but including that political leadership, which I think we've all shown right throughout this House thus far. But of course those actions around prevention are key. It will not be done tomorrow or next week or next month. We know that this is something that needs to be invested in now in order to see those results further down the line. That can be working within schools, primary schools, post-primary, community groups within communities, and importantly within families, all around calling out and challenging those issues that give rise to violence against women and girls.
Alan Chambers.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. Can I ask the Deputy First Minister for her assessment of the recent criticism aimed at the Billboard campaign of anti-paramilitarism posters by a former Finance Minister and Lord Mayor of Belfast, Mr. Máisín O'Muircheartaigh, in that he feels they stigmatise the community in West Belfast?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the member for his question. As we've said clearly in this place before, we must all stand united against the scourge of paramilitarism. There was never any justification for terrorism or paramilitarism. There's no role for that today in 2025, just as there was no role for that at any time during the last number of decades in this place. Certainly in terms of this Billboard campaign, that is designed to push forward with the agenda of the removal of any last traces of paramilitarism within communities. But I think it's also important that we don't stigmatise communities. There's some incredibly good work that is happening. I've always said this, when you look to those areas very often where there have been some problems by a small minority of people, that within those communities are great organisations doing fantastic work. There are people and families and communities doing so much in terms of volunteering, really changing their communities from within. So I think the key message today is that we are here to support those who are doing good, those who want to move on. We will not leave anybody behind. We will work with people in terms of moving them on. But when it comes to those who are engaged in criminal or paramilitary activity, it needs to stop, it needs to be stamped out, and it needs a criminal justice response.
We now move to questions to the Minister of Finance, and I call Alan Chambers.
Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
The last time the Executive was in the position to set a multi-year budget